Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Welcome back. Well, so much has changed since we last visited with Ontario farmers a year ago at March Classic. A year later, some issues have cooled, but others are still heating up. We hit the fields in Ontario to bring you this weekend's Farm Journal report. It's the moment of truth for the record amount of winter wheat planted across Ontario this year.
Overall, there's a lot of green.
As the soft red winter wheat crop breaks dormancy, farmers are uncovering fields that show potential for high yields.
Yeah, it's got some good roots. Considering for the winter.
And it comes as a surprise to some farmers who haven't seen much moisture this winter.
We haven't a lack of snow, as you can see, the freezing temperatures. So it's going to have an impact, I think, unless we're going to have, the clouds open up between now and planting, hopefully not during planting.
Julie Maw and her husband Kyle are third generation on this Lambton County, Ontario farm that originally started as a dairy.
We've been here for 14 years operating the operation. We have 3 kids that we farm with, and one is just turning 11 and is driving tractor and starting to get involved with the planting.
From a seed business to custom farming, the Maws stay busy. And just this year, Julie became one of 2 females to ever serve on the Grain Farmers of Ontario, or GFO, board of directors. All the various hats she wears from day to day is also what allows Ma to keep a pulse on agriculture beyond what she can see from their farm.
Last year was a tough year with input costs the way they were, the overhead. It wasn't just seed that was expensive, fertilizer expensive, gas was expensive. The whole makeup to make everything happen, people saw that fluctuation and that increase. The larger scale farms, can muffle that a little bit easier than our smaller farms, and so some are waiting to the spring to put those orders in just because of availability of income.
Crosby Devitt, CEO of GFO, understands the angst, as he says the risk tied to this year's crop is also high.
If we look into this 23 season, going into spring, farmers have probably more invested in their crop to grow the crop in 2023 than they've ever had in their entire career of farming.
Brendan Burney farms in Essex County, Ontario, but he's also the current chair of GFO. He says fertilizer availability across Canada has improved from a year ago, but prices are still high.
We were able to get the supply in last year, very tight, but those boats that arrived had to pay a fertilizer tariff when Russia lost its most favored nation status for Canada. So our farmers ended up, at that time we were hoping that it would be worked out between fertilizer companies and the government, but it ended up not being done.
And he says that fertilizer tax was then passed on to farmers.
After crops were planted, tariff bills arrived for farmers to then pay, and we're still trying to work with the federal government to try to get that money back into farmers' pockets, because it is a year later, but it is still sitting in a coffer there that has not been decided as to what they're going to do with it.
That fertilizer tariff is still in place on products from Russia today, but buyers have found products from other places for now.
But they have said that if supply is very tight, they still might have to bring a ship in, and we may have to try to advocate on getting it in, and then, like we say, still try to rectify the tariff situation.
Beyond the tariff issue, GFO is also watching disputes that haven't reached the Canadian borders yet. That includes Mexico's decree banning some GMO corn from the U.S.
Some of the concerns around the action in the declaration or the decree in Mexico certainly undermines that science-based decision-making and open trade. And so there's a concern there. And so we were quite happy to see the U.S. and the Canadian government come together and request the technical consultations, and certainly hoping that that can get resolved relatively quickly.
Helping make a case for science-based decisions is what's already taking root across Ontario. GFO is partnering with researchers from the University of Guelph to discover how to micromanage nutrients and inputs to find the maximum results.
I think what we're really uncovering now is there's still some really important fundamental questions about emissions or losses. And if we can solve those problems, that means we're going to be able to keep more of those nutrients in the land and available to the plants. So that's really where we're at now, and I think we're going to see some real breakthroughs over the next number of years.
The research helps GFO harvest real results, which then can help shape policy discussions as Canada sets its own climate goals.
We want it to be based on science and actual scientific fact, because sometimes we see that where an emotional response to a climate piece will come and it's not really rooted in fact, and then you're trying to explain how it's not going to work on farm, but to a regulator that is in an office building that doesn't quite understand, it's just, well, this is the policy and the way we're headed, and we want it to be a little more collaborative with government.
Challenges in farming change from year to year, but Moss still has big ambitions for their family farm, goals rooted in what's right for their farmland and their family.
We'd like to grow the farm. And young farmers, we're not alone. There's other, we're lucky that we started out farming with family, but not everyone's that fortunate. So building that legacy for the future.
Well, the GMO corn issue with Mexico, it's one that also brings up worries about what it could do longer term to corn demand. We'll take a look at that corn demand picture, not only in the U.S., but Canada, and look at really where that is heading. That's our Marketing Roundtable discussion from right here at March Classic next.